My name is Michael, and I've lived in Houston, Texas my whole life. I'm not the kind of person who gets involved in other people's business, but sometimes trouble finds you whether you want it to or not. That's what happened with my neighbor, Lydia. Lydia moved in about 6 months ago. She was friendly, almost too friendly if that makes sense. She'd wave every time she saw me, ask how my day was, and even brought over cookies once. I didn't mind at first. She seemed nice enough, just a little too eager. But as the weeks went by, something about her started to seem off. She always seemed on edge, like she was looking over her shoulder. I didn't think much of it at the time. I figured maybe she was just nervous about living alone. One night, I was sitting in my living room watching TV when I heard a loud crash. It was so sudden and so close that it startled me. I muted the TV and listened, trying to figure out where the sound had come from. That's when I noticed a light flickering in Lydia's house across the street. I walked to the window and looked out. Lydia's living room window was shattered, glass scattered across her front yard. I could see her moving around inside, her silhouette frantic against the dim light. My first thought was that someone had broken in, so I grabbed my phone and started dialing 911. But then I saw Lydia come to the door. She stepped outside, her face pale and her hands shaking. I went over to see if she was okay, still ready to call the police if I needed to. "Lydia, are you all right?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. She jumped at the sound of my voice and looked at me with wide eyes. "Oh, Michael, it's just an accident," she said quickly. "I was moving some things and it slipped, hit the window. I'm fine, really." I didn't believe her. The window looked like it had been hit from the outside, and the way she was acting made me even more suspicious. But she was insistent, and I didn't want to push too hard. So I offered to help her clean up the glass, but she refused. "No, it's late. I'll take care of it. Really, I'm fine," she said, her voice shaky but firm. I stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do, but she was already turning back toward her house, so I just nodded and walked away. Something wasn't right though. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach. A few days later, I noticed a for sale sign in Lydia's front yard. It seemed sudden, too sudden. I hadn't seen her since the night of the broken window, and now it looked like she was moving out. Curious, I called the realtor listed on the sign, pretending to be interested in the house. I figured I'd get some answers that way. The realtor didn't have much information, just that Lydia had put the house on the market suddenly and had already moved out. She was gone, just like that. It didn't sit right with me. I started asking around, talking to other neighbors, trying to figure out what was going on. That's when I learned the truth. Lydia had been a key witness in a murder case, a brutal killing that had happened a few years back. I didn't know the details, but the people involved were dangerous, the kind you don't want to cross. She had been in hiding, trying to stay under the radar, but it looked like they had found her. The broken window wasn't an accident. It was a warning, a sign that her life was in danger. I couldn't believe how close I had been to something so terrifying, something so deadly. Lydia was gone, vanished without a trace, and I knew deep down that whoever had come after her wouldn't think twice about doing the same to anyone else who got in their way. For weeks after, I couldn't sleep. Every little noise made me jump. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that somehow I was caught up in something far bigger and darker than I could understand. The for sale sign eventually came down, and a new family moved in. Life went back to normal, at least on the surface. But I knew the truth. Lydia had disappeared, her life shattered, just like that window, and I was left with a chilling reminder that sometimes danger is closer than you think. It's a memory that still haunts me, a story I wish I could forget, but I can't. My name is Nora, and I've lived in El Paso, Texas, for most of my life. My neighborhood is quiet, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, or at least thinks they do. But last spring, something happened that made me realize you can never really know what's going on behind closed doors. My neighbor Greg moved in about a year before everything happened. He was a quiet guy, kept to himself mostly, but always polite when we crossed paths. He worked odd hours, so I didn't see him much. Sometimes he'd be gone for days at a time, but I never thought much of it. People have their lives, and I had mine. One day I was watering my plants when I saw a delivery truck pull up to Greg's house. The driver carried a large package to Greg's front door, but something about it caught my eye. The box was plain, no labels or markings except for Greg's address. There wasn't even a return address on it. It struck me as odd, but I shrugged it off and went back to my gardening. A few hours later, I saw Greg come home. He picked up the package and carried it inside, glancing around like he was checking if anyone was watching. That look made my stomach churn. What could be in that box that would make him so nervous? Later that evening, I saw Greg outside, and I couldn't resist asking about the package. I kept it casual, like I was just making conversation. "Hey, Greg, I saw you got a delivery earlier. Pretty big package. Expecting something special." He paused for a second, and I could see the tension in his face. "Just some stuff I ordered online," he said. "Not meeting my eyes?" He mumbled something about having a lot of work to do and quickly went back inside. I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that something wasn't right. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept looking out my window, watching Greg's house, trying to convince myself that I was overreacting. Around midnight, I saw him again. This time, he was loading a suitcase into the trunk of his car. He moved quickly, almost frantically, like he was in a hurry to get away. I wanted to ask what was going on, but something told me to stay quiet. He got in his car and drove off without looking back. The street was silent again, but the knot in my stomach had tightened. The next day, I noticed Greg's car was still gone. He hadn't come back, and his house was eerily quiet. I didn't see any lights on, no movement, nothing. As the hours passed, I started to worry. What if something had happened to him? Then, in the afternoon, I saw a couple of police cars pull up to Greg's house. My heart started pounding as the officers got out and approached the door. They didn't knock. They just went straight in like they had a warrant or something. I watched from my window, my curiosity and fear battling inside me. It wasn't long before one of the officers came out carrying the same package I'd seen delivered the day before. Another officer followed with a smaller box, and I could see what looked like a gun inside a clear evidence bag. I had a sinking feeling in my stomach. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew it was bad. I stepped outside and walked over to where a few neighbors had gathered, whispering among themselves. One of them, Mrs. Cruz, said she'd overheard the officers talking. They mentioned something about drugs and stolen goods. I couldn't believe it. Greg had seemed so normal, so ordinary. But now it looked like he was involved in something criminal, something dangerous. The police were there for hours, searching the house, bringing out more evidence. It was like a scene out of a movie, but it was happening right in front of me. That evening, the news broke. The package Greg had received contained a stash of illegal drugs and other items linked to a crime ring that had been operating in the area. Greg's house was being used as a distribution point, a safe place to store and move stolen goods, and now he was gone, on the run from the law. I was shocked, but more than that, I was scared. How close had I been to something dangerous, something that could have put me in harm's way? I had been so curious about that package, so close to getting involved in something that I didn't understand. The neighborhood was never the same after that. Greg was never caught, and his house stayed empty for months. Every time I walked past it, I felt a chill, a reminder of how quickly things can change, how little we really know about the people around us. It's been months now, but I still find myself glancing at Greg's old house, half expecting to see him come back. But he's gone, and all I'm left with is the memory of that suspicious package and the danger that had been right next door. My name is Alex, and I've lived in San Antonio for most of my life. It's a peaceful city where people mind their own business, but look out for each other when needed. I thought I knew my neighborhood well until last fall, when I found out how little I really knew about the people around me. Brian was my next door neighbor for about 5 years. He was the kind of guy you barely noticed, always quiet, always kept to himself. We exchanged nods when we saw each other, but that was the extent of our interaction. He worked nights, I assumed, because his lights were on at odd hours, and he was never around during the day. I never gave it much thought, though. People have different schedules, different lives. It was late September when things started to feel off. The first thing I noticed was the smell. It was faint at first, just a whiff, when the wind blew in the right direction. I thought it was something rotting in the trash, but the smell got stronger every day. It was a sickly, sweet odor that clung to the back of my throat. I tried to ignore it, convincing myself it would pass. One night, the smell was so overpowering I couldn't sleep. I stepped outside to get some fresh air and noticed something strange. Brian's house was dark, no lights on at all. That was unusual. Even if he was out, there were always a few lights left on inside. The smell was stronger near his house, and I felt a sense of unease that I couldn't shake. The next morning, I saw a couple of police cars parked outside Brian's house. My heart skipped a beat. This was a quiet neighborhood. Nothing like this ever happened here. I watched from my window as officers went in and out of the house, their faces serious, grim. Hours passed, and more police arrived. They set up barriers, and soon after, crime scene tape went up around Brian's property. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The smell that had been haunting me was now mixed with the unmistakable scent of fear. A police officer came to my door to ask a few questions. He was polite but direct. Wanting to know if I had noticed anything unusual about Brian, I told him about the smell, the odd hours, but that was it. The officer nodded and told me to stay inside. As the day turned into evening, the neighborhood buzzed with rumors. People whispered about what could have happened, but nobody knew for sure. I felt sick with anxiety, my mind racing with possibilities. Finally, around sunset, a local news crew showed up. I watched as the reporter spoke in hushed tones. The camera focused on the house next door. My phone buzzed with messages from friends asking if I was okay, if I knew what was going on. I didn't have any answers, just a growing sense of dread. It wasn't until later that night, when the news finally broke, that I learned the truth. Brian had been living a double life. A quiet neighbor by day, but a serial killer operating under the radar for years. The police had found hidden compartments all over his house filled with disturbing trophies from his victims. The smell that had been haunting me came from the bodies they discovered in his basement. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me as the realization hit. I had lived next door to a monster, someone who had killed people and kept their remains just a few feet from walls. The silence that had once seemed just part of Brian's personality now felt like a mask, hiding something much darker. For days after, I couldn't stop thinking about how close I had been to something so horrific. I wondered how many times I had walked past his house, completely oblivious to the horrors inside. The neighborhood felt different, tainted by what had been uncovered. The sight of police tape and the memory of that smell haunted me. Even in my dreams, Brian's house was boarded up, and the crime scene tape eventually came down, but the fear remained. I couldn't shake the feeling that danger was closer than I had ever imagined, that the people around us might not be who we think they are. Life in San Antonio went on, but I was changed. The quiet of the neighborhood that I once found comforting now felt threatening. Every creak in the night, every unfamiliar face made my heart race. The realization that someone so close could hide such darkness left me with a permanent sense of unease. I don't know if I'll ever feel truly safe in my own home again. The quiet neighbor next door wasn't just a mystery, he was a nightmare, one that I still can't seem to wake up from.